Welcome to Tap Into an Expert, the podcast where we do the heavy lifting by tapping into the industry experts so you don't have to. On today's episode, I'm talking to the most cited attorney on the newly updated guidelines from the FTC, Jim Dudukovich, outside counsel for the Desire Company and partner at the law firm Nelson Mullins. Jim is truly a go-to person on all things FTC, that's Federal Trade Commission, and consumer protection. So Jim, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks so much, Eric. Happy to be here.
So the way we shop has transformed dramatically, and we no longer solely rely on recommendations from friends or a salesperson. We turn to online reviews for guidance. And according to Global Newswire, 95% of consumers read online reviews before buying a product. So reviews provide a platform for customers to share their experiences, whether positive or negative, giving potential buyers a glimpse of what they could expect from that product. But with the power of reviews comes a dark side, the emergence of fake reviews. In fact, over 50% of the reviews that we see, both 1- and 5-star reviews, are fake. According to Penn State University professor Stephen Woods, the FTC made an assessment that if they could manage to fight this fakery, it would increase consumer welfare as much as $15 billion. So now more than ever, authenticity and honesty in product reviews and content is increasingly important, and we're seeing increased regulation by the FTC. So I want to step back and really understand, first of all, is the boogeyman really coming out from under the bed? We've been hearing this folklore of the FTC coming for us for many, many, many years now. But nobody's ever thought that it would actually apply to them. We know that they're going to come after the DJ Khaled's and the Kardashians for crypto pump and dumps. We know that they're going to slap the wrist of Target and Walmart and Amazon and everybody who's participating in this, from Facebook on down, of places where you could buy reviews. But we didn't think that this was going to come to the everyday mom and pop. Is that what's happening? And before we get there and knowing what we could do to protect ourselves, Jim, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little history about how we got to where we are today, where this is really infiltrating every business out there.
So the Federal Trade Commission, it has one primary mission, which is protecting against unfair and deceptive practices in commerce. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Back in, around 1980, the Federal Trade Commission last updated these things called the endorsement guides. That's the short name for them. But what they are is guidance by the FTC, not binding law, but guidance by the FTC that says, hey, brands, when you're working with reviewers, endorsers, testimonialists, there are some fundamental things that you need to ensure happen. You need to make sure that they are transparent, that if they've got some relationship with you, that they're disclosing that so that the audience can understand and assess the credibility of it. Think about, if I tell you this is the best product I've ever tried, if you didn't know that I work for the company or that I made a commission if you bought the product, obviously that impacts the value of that review. So that concept of transparency is really important. The second concept is truthfulness, which is, if you as a brand can't say something about your product, meaning you can't say that it does X, Y, or Z, you can't hire other people to say that for you. You need to make sure that what the people that you're working with to talk about your brand say represent their honest opinions, experiences, and beliefs, and don't make claims about the product that you can't substantiate.
So can you go into that a little bit more? When you say that if you're not able to make a claim about your specific product, you cannot hire somebody else to make that claim on your behalf. What does that mean? Is that only in regards to health and wellness products?
It's really in regard to everything. Now, we could go down a very deep rabbit hole here about opinion versus fact. And so when someone that you're working with is talking about your brand or your product, and they're making what sound like objective, verifiable, factual statements about it. It helped me lose this much weight over this period of time. Things like that. If those are untrue, or if they are atypical, and it's not what the reasonable consumer should expect, then you can't push those out there as if they are true, reliable, and common. Okay. The example I used was a health and wellness example, but it doesn't need to be health. It can be things like the performance of a pair of shoes.
As in, these shoes make me jump higher or run faster.
Sure. And trying to decipher what constitutes opinion. This is the best tasting, couscous I've ever had. Okay, that's an opinion. But, this couscous is higher in, essential vitamins and minerals than any other couscous. That's a verifiable factual statement that your endorsers shouldn't be saying unless you have the backup and have shared that.
Now, what happens if somebody makes a claim on your behalf that you didn't feed them, that person said, yeah, I looked into it and I believe that this couscous is packed with nutrients, and then you're reposting that content even though you didn't script that for them?
Well, speaking of not scripted, I don't even like couscous, so I can't believe I brought that up as an example.
I'm a couscous fan.
So this is a bigger picture item, which is under the endorsement guides as they have been revised. So they were reissued in 2009 and updated, modernized, brought into the digital age. They hadn't been touched in 30 years, since long before the internet. And now that all of these new channels for communication have occurred, the FTC realized, wait a second, there are new things happening that the old guides didn't really cover. So we want to talk about those. And so they reissued and updated the endorsement guides in 2009. And subsequently, they did it again last year. And the point of those is to say, hey, all that stuff that we wrote about back in the days when we were mailing things to each other, nobody had the internet at their fingertips. We want to explain how those rules apply now. And one of the things that's happened over the course of those updates and some enforcement actions that have taken place is the FTC taking the position and clarifying that, listen, brand, most of it comes back to you. You are ultimately responsible for what happens with messaging about your product, that you have some connection. And what that means is when you're working with influencers or endorsers, you should have some rules of the road in place with them, the do's and don'ts, talking points, and so forth. You need to instruct them to some extent about their duty to be transparent, to be truthful. And then here's where I think the big pivot happened that people may not have been paying as much attention to, which is brands. It doesn't stop with putting a good contract in place and telling them what to do. It continues. Your responsibility to monitor what they're doing and to take corrective action when they veer outside the guidelines, that's still on you. It's not a set it and forget it thing. And so what the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general and the other authorities are saying is that you can't pass the buck on this responsibility. So when you're working with influencers, when you're working with agencies, when you're working with publishers, you have a responsibility to make sure that the direction you give them is followed and abided by. And if something goes wrong down the chain, every single stakeholder could be held accountable for that. If I hire an influencer to promote my couscous and they go out there and they start talking about how it's nutrient packed, I used to sneeze a lot and I don't anymore now that I'm eating this couscous twice a day, whatever it is, they're saying things that you can't substantiate. You have a duty to, number one, know they're doing that and to go back there and have them fix it.
What happens if you actually didn't have a formal engagement with that individual who made the claims about the couscous reducing sneezing? But then what happens if you repost that content? Are you liable for what they say?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. You can't take content that you yourself cannot support, substantiate, and validate, and then repost it and try to say, hey, I didn't say it, they did, because by reposting it, you're saying it.
And why does the FTC care? What is this all about at the end of the day?
So this is all about consumer protection. In the old days, it was a lot harder and more expensive for shysters and tricksters to fool consumers. Okay. Now it's really, really easy. And I think if I can say a couple of things about the current administration, one is that they are unbelievably vocal and passionate about protecting consumers, saving consumers from things that they don't believe that consumers can save themselves from. So with the way technology works, the way snake oil salesmen are able to fool consumers by using fake reviews, by hiding material terms and conditions, by other things, consumers are being hurt, and the FTC cares about it, and they're very vocal. Secondly, consumer reviews and testimonials, that is where the rubber really meets the road in today's culture. Okay, so many purchases are made online. And when you think about it, when I go online to a retailer or even to a brand's website to think about buying a product, when I see reviews right there at that point of purchase, then I can say, oh, it's got 5,000 five-star reviews. It's got no reviews lower than 5 stars. There are people saying that it's doing incredible things for them. I'm going to click this button and buy it right then and there. So I think what the Federal Trade Commission has realized is, okay, we cannot boil the ocean here. We can't tackle everything. Let's go to the most acute pain points where consumers are being harmed the most. And let's try to put some measures in place to mitigate against that. So the Federal Trade Commission proposed a new rule, and it is going to be in force and effective come October of 2024.
So that's a big development, because in the past, these have been guidelines and recommendations. But what you're saying is now it is actually becoming law?
Correct. So the endorsement guides, and this can be very confusing. It's a very intricate puzzle, but the endorsement guides are not binding law. What they are the Federal Trade Commission's sort of articulated views on certain behaviors that they think are unfair or deceptive. However, if you violate the FTC endorsement guides, you haven't broken the law per se. What you've done probably is a violation of the bigger, broader Section 5 of the FTC Act. But it's not a crime or it's not a violation to not comply with the endorsement guides. However, by not complying with the endorsement guides, what you're doing is the FTC has said, don't do this. And you're saying, I'm going to do it anyway. And they can come after you. The big difference is that a rule, and I'm capitalized R, a rule promulgated by the Federal Trade Commission is binding law. And the Federal Trade Commission has authority to promulgate rules to counteract behavior that they believe and can prove is prevalent and is harming consumers. And if they can get specific enough in their description of what businesses are doing that's harming consumers, then all of a sudden, if you violate that rule, as opposed to violating guidance, the FTC can take you straight to federal court. Okay, do not pass go, do not collect $200. They're going straight to court, and they can sue you for civil penalties. And civil penalties right now are around $52,000 per violation.
And when you say per violation, is that per product with all of the reviews? Is that every single fake review? How can brands think about that?
Great question. And that's going to be up to the courts and up to the Federal Trade Commission to try to prove. But if you are working with, let's say you're working with 500 influencers, and each one of them is doing something wrong. And what they're doing wrong, they're doing iteratively on a daily basis for the course of 6 months. You know, you can try to come back to saying that every single distinct post by each one of those influencers is a separate violation. Now, it's up to the courts and up to the FTC as to whether they would seek the full amount of the civil penalties per violation and what they would consider to be separate and distinct violations. But it is a massive weapon that the Federal Trade Commission now has. And as I said, that rule becomes effective October 21st of 2024. And I am pretty darn confident that we're going to see some lawsuits immediately thereafter to prove some points and to make some examples.
And that's exactly what I was about to ask, is at the end of October, do you think that we're going to see a flood of lawsuits? And is it going to be more than going after the typical suspects, the big box guys, the strongest, biggest out there who could afford to pay this? Or do you think that we're actually going to see it start hitting home on some of these smaller companies or mom and pop operations?
It's a good question. And I'm going to have to unfortunately confess something which nobody wants to hear and maybe nobody wants to believe. But the government has limited resources. The laws are not self-enforcing. There are plenty of laws out there that, I sometimes violate the speed limit. Usually I'm not caught. Does it mean I didn't break the law? No, but I got away with it. And when you talk about the sort of the digital marketing space and the ecosphere around reviews and testimonials, there simply is no way that the Federal Trade Commission or the state attorneys general can go after everybody. They have to be selective. They have to prioritize. They have to try to get the biggest bang for their buck. Okay, we've got this many people. We can bring this many investigations or this many suits. Here's where we're going to focus because we think that'll alleviate harm the most based on that expenditure of time and resources and human capital. And it might set a good example that we can publish to hopefully deter others from doing the same thing.
And there's so many different ways that this can come into effect for smaller brands. I mean, one is obviously somebody saying, I was paid to review this couscous and it does not make me sneeze since I've been having it. There's others. Hey, I just discovered this couscous this morning and it's delicious. That's also a violation, even though they didn't make a claim about it, because if they were even gifted, let alone forget being paid, but if they were just gifted that, they have to announce it. And that is now currently against the law to not say that you have some type of material relationship with the brand. Is that also accurate now?
That's accurate. Once again, when we start to get into here's what the law says, here's how the law is practically enforced, there is some distinction there. When you're taking chances, you should ask yourself, okay, am I taking a chance that what I'm doing is a violation? Or am I taking a chance that, I know it's a violation, but I'm taking a chance that no one's going to come after me? Or that if they do come after me, I'm going to come up with some way to defend it. Or even if I unsuccessfully defend it, I think I can handle the consequences. Those are important points, but what I think you were getting at, which is a really, really important piece of this, when you think about maybe parts of the regulations that people may not understand or may not want to understand, it's this. Even if a review that you give about a product is 100% authentic and genuine and truly represents your honest opinions, experiences, and beliefs, if you have a connection with the brand, whether it's because they gave you the product for free to try, or whether you're getting paid commissions, or whether you work for the company, okay, if you have some connection, then even if your review is honest, you still have a duty to let people know about that connection, because it's up to the audience to decide whether it's important or not. You can stand here and jump up and down till you're blue in the face and say, yes, I got paid to do this, but I promise you, this is really what I think of it. Then it's up to the audience to decide, okay, I believe you. I know you got paid for it, but I believe you that that's what you really think of it. Or for them to say, you know what? If you got paid for it, I'm not giving you any credit at all for your opinion because I think it's biased.
And that's what I love actually about all of this is the FTC just wants what consumers want, is to not be misled by companies. And I will say this is not only for the benefit of consumers. This really is in place to help brands as well. I mean, as you said, it is so easy to manipulate, to scam these days. And it's happening against brands too. A lot of the one-star reviews that we read are surprisingly fake. And people don't really understand how easy it is to go on a Facebook market group and buy thousands of reviews, either 1 star or 5 stars. 20,000 Facebook groups were recently shut down because Amazon finally had to start suing their vendors. And the reason why somebody would do a fake review, there was this very sad story about these 2 women who created this product for nursing mothers. And it was so successful and it was so helpful. And then it obviously was knocked off by an overseas company. And that overseas company paid for thousands of one-star reviews on their product. So it completely knocked it out of the algorithm on Amazon and it wouldn't even show up in a search. So the knockoff product was the only one there to purchase, and they took over, and the women's company unfortunately had to shut down. So this is not just a scary, horrible thing that everybody has to be looking over their shoulder for that's going to get them in trouble. This is for the protection of small businesses as well.
100%. And I think stepping back a little bit, so the endorsement guides are relatively broad. They cover a wide swath of different types of behavior related to the use of influencers and endorsers and testimonials. This new rule that was proposed and went through the comment period and is now going to be final and binding in October is really just a sliver. It's a sliver of what the endorsement guides cover, where the FTC said, you know what, going back to what I said before, here's where we think the most harm is taking place. Here's where we think we should channel our efforts. And so what it does, this new rule, is it covers fake reviews. And a review can be fake for a variety of reasons. Either the person didn't exist, or the person didn't really use the product, or the person used the product, but they're saying things about it that don't reflect what their actual experience was. And so there are certain contexts where a fake review is a violation. And it could be brought against the brand. It could be brought against the reviewer. It can be brought against, any other stakeholder in that supply chain. But one of the other pieces of it is there's an entire section on use of fake indicators of social influence or importance. Okay, so that's fake reviews. That is fake likes, subscribers, shares, saves, views, whatever it may be. Because it's so easy technologically, unfortunately nowadays, to come up with fake likes, fake subscribers, fake followers, and also to inject fake reviews into the stream of commerce in a way that pollutes it. And people aren't getting honest and accurate information. And so while I, as this, poor mortal man over here, don't believe that we're ever going to defeat the robots, I do believe that is going to be an intense focus by the commission following the effective date of the rule, is they're going to look for some of the biggest, most egregious abusers of, use of bots and fake followers and things like that, and try to bring them to account. And that can have a couple of impacts. It could put some of the biggest, baddest guys out of that business. Maybe, maybe not. It's very whack-a-mole. They'll pop up somewhere else. But it can also send a message to people interested in doing that and looking for a side hustle on creating fake reviews or fake followers. But perhaps, this is the super optimistic Jim talking, perhaps it will raise awareness with consumers so that they won't be as easily fooled. And they will go in with their eyes open. And when they go, you know what, this looks a little too good to be true. Really? 15,000 five-star reviews, and those are the only reviews? That doesn't sound right. And it's unfortunate. This is part of the framework, but it can introduce some cynicism, some skepticism, some vigilance on the part of consumers so that they're not fooled.
A little paranoia is a good thing. So the more educated consumers become on this matter, the more they're actually going to protect themselves. And it makes a big difference. I mean, to your point about bots, there were 200 million bot reviews that were taken down last year before any consumer even saw them. Like Amazon just didn't approve them immediately. With those 200 million taken down before anybody was able to see them, still 50% of the reviews up there are fake. It's making a massive impact. On Google, 7 million business profiles are fake. But what I really like about what you said about this just providing more education to consumers for them to make their own actually provide a little bit of skepticism is there's a lot of brands that know what they're doing is wrong and they still choose to do it because they're going to go out there and they're going to run television ads saying that this couscous will bring down your sneezing and it is packed full of nutrients, and they're going to pump so much money into that advertising that it becomes one of the biggest couscous companies, probably the biggest couscous company in the world. So by the time that the FTC catches up with them and sues them, they'll pay the fine. And it doesn't matter if that couscous is actually hurting consumers. They pay the fine. And consumers are the ones that are stuck with that. In fact, the global impact of fake online reviews each year is $152 billion. $152 billion of impact out of the consumer's pocket for this fake review epidemic. And a lot of that means that these products are being returned. They end up in landfill. It's actually hurting the world. 33% of people who encountered a fake review return that product, and 85% of us have read a fake review within the last time we shopped. So this is truly, truly a massive global issue. I mean, it's just eroding trust. But again, a little paranoia could actually help us quite a bit. So let's go into a little bit about what you can do. What are the things that a small brand, a big brand needs to be thinking about if you launch? And how do you go from a perspective like my brother? He has a one-man company. They do exceedingly well selling a product, one product that he created on Amazon. And all the time he's struggling with the review issue, because if somebody gets his product 2 days late because of a shipping delay, they leave a bad review. It has nothing to do with the actual product. So he's always tempted to just, I want to spend $50 and buy 100 fake reviews because that will help me with the algorithm. What do people like that need to think about? What can they do going forward?
Part of it is to be determined. I want to go back to kind of what you said, because the things that you've just talked about, it's a very holistic approach to the entire e-commerce ecosphere. And the FTC and its rules and regulations and the enforcement actions it brings is a small part of that. But the court of public opinion is huge, and it's important. And so, frankly, there are businesses who have been taken to task by the FTC through enforcement actions or investigations, and consumers have never even heard about it because they're not scouring the legal journals to find out what cases have happened. What they're hearing about is from their friends. And when I say friends, I mean people that they're connected with on social media or otherwise. So if you're engaging in behavior that is going to paint you as a bad company that can't be trusted, that word is going to spread, and that can harm you a whole heck of a lot more than an enforcement action. Because once consumers don't trust you, gaining that trust back can be very difficult. So I think it's a mistake for businesses to compartmentalize the strictly legal compliance piece and the brand love and reputation and consumer trust side of things. And I think it needs to be looked at as a whole. And frankly, transparency and truthfulness should be part of how your company's built. Okay. The processes that you put in place, the contracts that you use, who you work with. Do you vet them? Do you do a little bit of due diligence to find out, okay, this agency I'm going to hire, do they really know what they're doing? Do they do things the right way? Those are things that businesses should be doing because they'll pay off in the long run, either through effectiveness and success, or at the very least, through not getting sued for doing things the wrong way, right? One of my pet peeves as a lawyer is a brand will put a contract in place with an influencer or maybe a smaller agency or somebody. And the contract has a provision that says, you agree to comply with the FTC endorsement guides. And maybe they'll include a link to the guides, right? That is not effective. I mean, sophisticated lawyers who've been practicing for 30 plus years sometimes have trouble deciphering what the endorsement guides mean. Okay. So telling a 23-year-old blogger, you're going to comply with the FTC endorsement guides, that doesn't work. Use the contract as a training tool. Explain what the guides mean. Explain what their duties and responsibilities are. Include an addendum or a schedule with examples and suggestions. Hey, here's how you can be transparent and disclose your connection with us. Here are some different ways you can do it. Here are some talking points about the product. Here are some things you should never say it does because it doesn't do those things. Use the contract not as a check the box. Okay, we did our contract. We put responsibility on them. We're in the clear, because that's not how it works.
Sure. And the fake reviews is one thing. And the other thing that you're bringing up, which is so important, is the influencer aspect of it. I mean, with $26 billion spent in 2023 on influencers, that's a lot of influencers spreading messages about brands. But I highly doubt that they're taking the time to read it. I mean, I've been around influencers when they get something in the mail and they get told exactly what to say. They turn on their camera, they open it up, and they say it. They didn't read anything, but they did, say, yes, I'm holding identified, like I will take responsibility. Whose responsibility is it if they still say something against these new laws?
Good luck trying to enforce that indemnification project. Because even if you do, the money that you're going to spend to sue them and try and hold them accountable, do they have the money to actually back up? And number two, more importantly, can money solve the problem? If you have been tarnished or blemished for, unlawful behavior involving influencers, how much money can an influencer pay you to make it right? That's not going to solve the problem. But let me back up and say something, because I don't want to assume that people understand where I'm coming from here. Influencer marketing is not unlawful. It is completely lawful. In fact, it is incredibly valuable. Okay. It is incredibly valuable for people to hear about products or services from people who aren't the actual manufacturer or provider of the product or service. Now, the fact that there may be consideration or compensation involved doesn't make it per se unlawful. What makes it unlawful is if they lie about what they experienced, or they fail to disclose the existence of a relationship. So none of these rules and regulations are intended to stamp out influencer marketing. They're intended to provide some guardrails around ways that influencer marketing can be deceptive. There are so many stories about, oh my God, my cousin got to quit their job because all they do is, review products and make money. There are stories like that, frankly, I think certainly folks in the younger generation, they idolize that. They admire that. They want to be that person. They don't want to be the person that works really hard and, earns this. They want to be able to sit around and review products and make money by never leaving their house. And that becomes this iconic thing. And so I think there's going to be a continued incentive for people to want to be product reviewers and to make themselves available and trying to shop themselves to brands, agencies, everybody else. And so I don't think it's going anywhere. The question is, will it get cleaned up? Will there be appropriate safeguards and gates put into the system to introduce some hygiene into influencer marketing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the most depressing things for me and any generation older than me is when you hear like my daughter saying, I think after college, I'm going to go into influencing. I'm going to be an influencer instead of I want to be a lawyer or a doctor or the things that we were told to be when we were younger, because this is the new inspiring career that seems pretty easy and you get paid pretty well. And there's got to be a tipping point somewhere. Not every single person. I mean, I remember seeing like being on a reality TV show was what everybody aspired to be. And everybody, like 1 out of 5 people were going to be on a reality TV show. And it seems that now this is the influencer time where 1 in 5 people is an influencer, especially with the micro influencer trend gaining speed. But there has to be a tipping point, and it's got to be led by consumers, that they just need a resource that they could trust that's going to give them consistent, accurate information about products that they are interested in trying or want to discover for whatever particular use.
Yep. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about in detail yet, but is really, really critical in this entire system, are businesses setting up review sites or, review sites where they don't disclose that they're the ones behind the site. And you go to, my wife and I were trying to get a new mattress. I defy you to find me a truly objective, unaffiliated mattress review site, because they don't exist. And there have been some cases involving the mattress industry in particular, because mattress manufacturers will set up websites that look like a trusted resource. Hey, we've done the work so you don't have to. We've reviewed all the mattresses and here are the best ones, when in fact it's actually being run by one of the manufacturers, coincidentally the one whose mattress is highest rated. And that is something that the new rule takes on head on. There is a specific provision in there about It is a violation of the rule to run a website deceptively or that materially misrepresents who's behind it. And so we're going to see some action in that space too.
Yeah, I think that was an eye opener to me when we sat on the panel together with the Better Business Bureau and the General Counsel of Meta, and you were talking about cases like that. I had never heard of it, and I look at those sites all the time, and it seems that they're comparing products, but what you exposed is that they're actually run by the company that they're going to recommend and say, out of all the ones out there, this is the best. And there's no way for a regular consumer to know that. So has that come into law? Is that something that people are going to be more aware of or penalized for in this upcoming October change?
Yeah. So that's going to be low hanging fruit. That will be low hanging fruit for the regulators because they are going to look at some of these product review sites, and a lot of them are set up so that, hey, there's just educational, informational stuff over here, but then there's a link to, see the ratings and reviews of the mattresses they tested or whatever the product is. Those are out there. And there's a lot of them, and those will be the easiest ones. Out of all of this, I think those are going to be the easiest ones for the regulators to identify and to go after. But where that leaves you is, again, we're going after the brands. When I say we, the government, they're going after the brands, cleaning up the marketplace, but that's not going to have any impact on other contributors to some of the deception that goes on.
Yeah, and there's so much out there that's almost impossible to fight. There's so many companies that say, buy my product so that it's an official purchase, and I will refund the money for that product as long as you leave a 5-star review. How would anybody ever know?
Can't do that anymore either. That's another part of the rule, which is you cannot incentivize a review if the incentive is conditioned on the review being either positive or negative. You can't condition an incentive on the sentiment expressed by a review. That conditioning of the incentive, that can be express or it can be implied. So one of the examples that they talk about in the rule and in the commentary for the rule is if, Jack's Steakhouse says, hey, write a review saying how much you love Jack's Steakhouse and we'll give you a gift certificate. You're not expressly telling them that they must say they loved it, but the implication's there. And even if I can write a review that says, I hated Jack's Steakhouse, their couscous was the worst thing I ever tasted, whatever it is, right? You can leave a very negative 1-star review and still get the gift certificate. In the consumer's mind, they're thinking, wait, I might not get the gift certificate if I say something bad. So that is another part of the rule, is you can't condition incentives on saying positive things or negative things.
Yeah, and that's so hard because I was actually out with my daughter recently and she was purchasing something, and the cashier, right while we were checking out, she said, hey, if you go on right now and leave a 5-star review on Google, we'll give you 10% off. I'm at the checkout, about to pay. And my daughter says, yep, hold on. Goes, does it. Before I could even say no, she had shown it 5 stars.
Yep.
Great, 10% off your purchase.
And again, that is not allowed. However, how does that get policed? How does an enforcement action come about? If a memo comes from headquarters to every location saying, hey, every time somebody buys the product, tell them to write a 5-star review and you'll give them 10% off. When that memo is uncovered, then all of a sudden that can be the hook to get the authorities in there. But, if it's just something that happens, and again, this is not because of sinister intent.
Sure.
I'm not saying everybody that violates these provisions is a bad guy. A lot of times your employees think they're doing the good thing by doing something like that. They think they're doing a good thing. They don't understand how it might be deceptive.
Yeah. So there are the more sinister ones, which is review hijacking. Specifically, if you go onto an Amazon page, you're reading the reviews, it says this is a great product, 5 stars, 5 stars. And then you start reading some of the details and you realize the reviews that you're reading aren't for the product on that product page. They are from the company, the manufacturer, but it's a totally different product. Most of the times it's a new product, and they're just putting reviews from a different product that they manufacture on that page. So review hijacking, where does that sit in these new laws?
So it's a great question, because when the rule was proposed, that was one of the elements that was going to be deemed unlawful under the rule. There was a lot of pushback in the comment period. Not to get too deep into the legal machinations of passing rules, but the FTC has a formal rulemaking process, and there are things they have to do, some hurdles they've got to jump to be able to codify certain behavior as unlawful under a rule. Review hijacking. Way too many people objected and said, hang on, it's too vague, it's too ambiguous, it's too difficult to tell whether a product is substantially similar, and therefore you can repurpose reviews for an offshoot
I see.
of that product. So the FTC, I think, decided it's going to be way too hard to come up with a way to articulate when something is a violation versus when it's not. This product is 5% bigger. Is that a substantially similar product, or is that different? Can I not use the reviews for that? So because of the pushback, that section of the rule was removed. Now, not to belabor it, it doesn't mean that review hijacking is lawful.
It makes sense. I hate to say, because I remember it was causing so much worry with a lot of our clients, because they were saying, okay, do we really have to have all different reviews on the 60-inch TV versus the 65-inch TV versus the 70-inch TV? It's the exact same TV. It's just a different size.
Yep.
Does that constitute review hijacking? So I could understand why that happened. But there are so many times where I'm reading about a lawn chair and it will say, but yeah, it's okay, but it's really for the sun. It doesn't keep you dry in rain. It's like, well, why would a lawn chair keep you dry anyway? And then you start figuring out, oh, this is actually reviews for the sun umbrella, not for the lawn chairs. They just copy and pasted all of those reviews. So how long does it take? I mean, it's good to hear that the FTC can't just throw some new laws, because it takes people 10 plus years to get something approved by the FTC in the first place. So it's good that it goes both ways. But what are we going to see next? So these are coming out in October 2024. How long until something like review hijacking, which is very misleading, I believe should be very illegal, but clearly needs more detail? How does that evolve? When are we going to see changes there?
That is when we look at my crystal ball. So again, back to my point that the government has limited resources and limited time. So they have to figure out where they're going to focus. A couple of years ago, there was a Supreme Court case. It was the AMG capital management case, which for lawyers, they're like, oh yeah, I know that. But not everybody does. And that case was incredibly significant because what it did was, for well over 4 decades, the FTC was relying on one section of the FTC Act to sue companies and try and get money damages for engaging in unfair and deceptive practices. Unfortunately, the piece of the statute that they were relying on to do that never says that they're allowed to get money damages. In fact, it basically says under this section, you can enjoin them from engaging in the behavior. Basically, you can get an injunction while you fight it out through an administrative proceeding. So the FTC had been using this Section 13B for 40 plus years. And the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, basically said, I can't believe you've been getting away with this for over 4 decades because you don't have statutory authority to use this section to sue for damages. So that sent a shock to the FTC system. And it started looking at, okay, that massive weapon that we've been using, we no longer have it. What can we do to put teeth into our enforcement capabilities? So one way is promulgating rules. And so this rule on fake reviews, they're introducing a new negative option rule about auto-renewing subscriptions. They're looking at vulnerabilities and areas where they can, as I said before, get the most bang for their buck by passing a rule, for instance. Now, another thing they did in the wake of that AMG case was sending out these notices of penalty offenses, okay, which they had sent 700 notices to all of these companies. Everybody they can think of. They just pull out their whole Rolodex, their whole mailing list. They sent these things out. So the way a notice of penalty offense works is if the Federal Trade Commission has challenged a business for a certain behavior and litigated that all the way through to completion. They didn't enter into a consent decree. They didn't settle it. It actually went through the courts. Everything was proved out, and a finding was made that, yes, that behavior violates the Federal Trade Commission Act. When that happens, that case basically becomes binding law. It becomes precedent, if you will. However, it cannot be used as a grounds for suing somebody unless they knew about it.
Huh. Okay.
So, bringing this full circle, the notice of penalty offenses, basically what those were, was the FTC sending out these, and they've done a few tranches of them for different elements to different audiences. They basically said, essentially, hey, the statute doesn't say you can't do this. We don't have any rules that say you can't do this, because rules can be difficult and take some time to pass. But, hey, we found a case from 1945 where somebody did this and got in trouble for it and it was deemed to be deceptive. We're putting you on notice of that case. So if we catch you doing that, then we're going to take you straight to court. Does that make sense? It's a very convoluted,
It does.
It's a very convoluted methodology. So I think what the FTC is doing is they're trying to figure out what are the different tools and tactics we can use to give teeth to our enforcement authority. And so this rule on fake reviews is absolutely front and center, spotlight. That is a big one. The notices of penalty offenses they sent out, that was another tactic. So we'll see. I can't get behind the curtain and see what they're talking about in secret back there in terms of what they want to go after. But, they do have some fundamental pillars that they're considering. They look at vulnerable populations. They look at health and wellness and safety. They look at financial crimes. They're less concerned about you hiring people to say a product tastes good when it actually doesn't than they are about businesses who are tricking you into forking over money through some financial scheme.
This is the last question, and then we're going to get into the rapid fire conclusion questions. But where does that money go? If I'm the consumer, I was tricked. I bought Jim's couscous and it had cranberries that were not magical, and I ate them anyway. And the FTC sues Jim's couscous company. Do I get any of that money?
You could. It depends on what sort of the vehicle used for challenging you by the FTC was. But certainly consumer restitution is part of what can be sought. And so many, if not most, of these investigations or challenges by the Federal Trade Commission result in a consent decree. So they don't get litigated all the way to the end. The parties settle. And then what happens is the consent decree is essentially a contract between the defendant, the business, and the government that basically says, from now on, you are always going to do this, or you're never going to do this, whatever it is. It prescribes behavior. And you're also going to pay us this much money. And then that money will often be distributed to aggrieved consumers. Are you going to get all your money back? Probably not. But you could get something. And you may get notices in the mail saying, hey, it looks like you were a customer of this company between these years. You can apply to be part of the settlement and get some restitution. So that's what can happen. But a lot of it funds the FTC's coffers so that they can keep doing what they're doing. Consent decrees are really tricky because one of the other ways that the FTC can sue you for civil penalties is if you violate a consent decree. If you breach that contract, they can take you straight to court and the damages can be significant. So when you enter into a consent decree, what you're doing is you're promising, okay, for the next 20 years, I will or won't do certain things. I'm going to give you some money, oftentimes, and you get to check in on me and look over my shoulder as much as you feel like to make sure I'm compliant. And the really interesting piece of a consent decree is that oftentimes the prescribed behavior, what you either are not allowed to do or what you must do, goes above and beyond what the law actually requires. So in other words, you may be held to a higher standard by contract with the government for 20 years. So it's a tough situation to be in.
So in conclusion, the boogeyman is actually coming out from under the bed, but is really for everybody's best interest is what this is all about. It is to help small businesses not get taken advantage of with fake one-star reviews that are going to hurt them. It is to just create more honesty and transparency so customers can make more informed purchase decisions so they don't get misled. This is not a scary negative thing, and it is all with very good intention, is what it sounds like to me.
Absolutely.
And now we are moving into my favorite part of the podcast, the Expert's Corner, our conclusion questions, where I will fire off some questions and I want to hear the first thing that comes to your mind. You are not scared to go against the grain and voice your opinion, which could be controversial. What's the most controversial opinion on this industry that we're talking about now that you hold?
Ooh. So, going back in 2012, I believe it was, the FTC held a public workshop called .com disclosures. It was all about getting industry input into the endorsement guides and how proper disclosures could be made online and so forth. And I was on that panel representing the industry. I was on the board of directors of a trade association. So I was the industry representative. And my opening statement was basically challenging what I believed to be the Federal Trade Commission's baseline assumption that consumers are way too dumb to realize some things. And so my view is we still haven't caught up. The revised endorsement guides, this rule and otherwise, they're starting to give consumers a little more credit about how savvy and sophisticated they are, how well they understand the internet. When do they need to be told something by smacking them right in the middle of the forehead with it versus when will they make those assumptions? And I think when you look at digital natives and younger generations, they are skeptical. They do understand what's going on there. Now, they don't fully understand it. I'm not saying there's no room for some safeguards to help protect them. But in a nutshell, I think that the Federal Trade Commission's baseline for what constitutes a reasonable consumer hasn't caught up with technology.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. People are so much more savvy than we used to be about advertising and marketing in general. I mean, when I was growing up, I wanted to drink Gatorade because Gatorade's whole thing was a very catchy song. I want to be like Mike. I didn't want to drink Gatorade. I wanted to ball like Michael Jordan. And I believed that that was something that was going to be a step in me getting there. It didn't work. But today, people aren't as fooled by traditional marketing and advertising, which is why I guess this is taken over as the way to manipulate the consumer. But yeah, I agree. People are way more savvy, aware than we used to be. So I think that's a great thing that you give consumers some credit for. And last question. If you had to bet your career on one prediction, what would it be?
I don't like to gamble. I play games of skill. Okay. Here's what I'm going to say. There are a lot of black hats out there. There are a lot of bad guys. There are a lot of sinister actors taking advantage of consumers and the system of commerce. I think that we're going to see more white hats coming out there. I think that we're going to see people with the knowledge and the resources and the capacity coming out with new ways to counteract some of the bad stuff. I'm not going to bet my career on that.
Sure.
But that is my wishful thinking, that there are going to be some do-gooders who try to help clean up the system.
I hope so, for everybody's sake. And Jim, this was incredibly informative. For people who want more detail, Jim penned an incredible article, The Price of Fake Reviews Just Went Up, What the FTC's New Rule Means for You, which you can find at nelsonmullins.com/The Price of Fake Reviews Just Went Up. Jim Dudukovich, the most cited lawyer in these new rules and regulations on the FTC, partner at the law firm Nelson & Mullins, outside counsel for the Desire Company, formal senior counsel at Coca-Cola. It has been an absolute honor having you. A pleasure speaking with you as always. Thank you very much for spending the time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.